It's easy to rejoice when things are going well, when everything is going as we want it to be, as we think it should be. But it's a real challenge to take joy in the Lord when you're suffering, when perhaps things are unfolding in our lives in a way that we didn't expect, or when there is oppression and calamity that we're suffering, or God's people might be suffering in any given context, as many are right now elsewhere in the world. That's another matter, isn't it? Trusting God when things aren't as you believe they should be. Well, I want to look at the tremendous faith of a prophet of God who struggled with this. And in the midst of his agonizing over God and God's justice and God's goodness and the suffering of his people, he makes a tremendous affirmation of faith that's one of my favorite texts in the whole Bible, one of the most beautiful, soul-stirring, faith-building passages in all the prophets. And so we're going to look at Habakkuk today, and I'm going to have the passages from the book that we'll examine on the screen. But if you want to turn to Habakkuk in your Bibles, go to the table of contents, right? So that you can find it. But a little bit of help for you, it's right before Zephaniah. That'll really help, right? Okay. No, it's not a book perhaps we're as familiar with, and yet it is a profound and thrilling entry in the catalog of the minor prophets. And I have preached on it before. In fact, I did a 2-part lesson where I did more of an exposition through all the chapters. We went right through the whole book. And that's not what I'm going to do today. And I make no apology for returning to this. I've preached on it before, and I'll preach on it again. And it's a text we need to cherish and memorize and return to again and again, and use to help others as well when they struggle in the way that Habakkuk did. And so I want to call this lesson Joy and Strength. Now, as I said a moment ago, it's easy to feel strong and to have joy when you're blessed with abundance. But here, the full title is Joy and Strength in Times of Trouble. So that's what I'd have you write down. And the reason I'm using Habakkuk is the prophet was looking down the stream of time, and he was seeing in the near future how God's people were going to suffer great calamity and great hardship when God was going to chastise them through the Babylonians. So we'll see that as we proceed. So let's look at, first of all, the prophet's complaint here. What the book of Habakkuk is it's a series of alternating complaints and replies. You have Habakkuk expressing his concern, and then you have a reply from the Lord. And then you have his response, and you have the Lord's response. And then you have his prayer at the end and this dramatic conclusion that we'll work toward. And so let me give you the context of what is happening here. Now, this is about the 7th century or so before Christ. And what Habakkuk is struggling with is, here you see on this map of the ancient Near East where Israel would be on the Mediterranean coast, and you see Jerusalem there. And the dominant power in the region, the world empire dominating that whole part of the world, was Assyria. And God used Assyria to come in and take away the northern 10 tribes into captivity, to chastise the northern part, or the northern kingdom of Israel, because of their idolatry. But it wouldn't be long before Assyria would fall and Babylon would become the dominant power in the region. The Babylonians were going to conquer the Assyrians, and they would control the area. And then Habakkuk apparently has had it revealed to him that the Babylonians then will come and carry away the rest of God's people. The Babylonians will come and conquer Judah and take Jerusalem, and the people will be led captive. And he is extremely worried about what's going to happen. He's deeply distressed about this, and he's having, you might say, at least until we get to the end of the book, he's having something of a crisis of faith, and he's afraid. He's afraid of what's on the horizon. And what he's dealing with is this. He's wondering how God, a holy and just God, how he can use these wicked people. And the Assyrians were vicious and cruel. The Babylonians were as well when they would conquer a people. How can the Lord use these wicked pagans as his instrument to chastise Israel and allow them to cruelly conquer God's chosen people? You see him express this struggle, but I want you to notice the language here in Habakkuk 1, verses 12 and 13. And you see how he's trying to reconcile what he knows about God, his understanding of God, who God is, and what's going to be happening. And so he says, "Are you not from everlasting, O Yahweh, O Lord my God, my Holy One?" He knows God is the Holy One. He knows God is just. He says, "O Lord, you have ordained them," the Babylonians, "as judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them for reproof." So he's acknowledging God is going to use these pagan peoples to come in and chastise, to punish his people. And so he's disturbed over the prospect of that. But notice he calls God by his covenant name, Yahweh. He calls him the Holy One, the Rock. So he knows that this is what God is like. This is who God is. But how can that be? He says, "You're of purer eyes than to see evil. You cannot even look at wrong. So why do you look idly at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he?" In other words, even though Israel, the people of Judah in particular, were in sin and needed to be chastised, the Babylonians in his minds were far worse. Israel was far more righteous. So how can you allow these people to come and dominate us? How can you sit by and allow that to happen to us? How can you use them this way? He wants them to be punished. He wants Babylon to be judged for the evil that they're doing in their conquest that's going to swallow up Israel. That's going to swallow up Judah, rather. But notice what he says here. Let's key in on that term. Why? Why, God? Why? That's the question, right? That's the cry of Christ from the cross, as he cited the Psalm of David in Psalm 22. My God, why? So that's the crisis of faith. That's struggling to understand. That's the struggle to reconcile what we know about God, but what might be happening in our lives and what we think should be happening and the way we think that it ought to be. So what's the Lord's reply? That's the prophet's complaint. What's the Lord's reply to this? Well, I'm just selecting a few highlights here. But what does the Lord tell him? Notice, the Lord answered me, he says, Habakkuk 2, "Write the vision. Make it plain on tablets so he may run who reads it." God wants this recorded. In other words, this isn't just a private assurance to Habakkuk. This is for all of God's people to know. He wants this to go out for the messenger to be able to read it and run, I think the idea is, and take it out to the rest of God's people. So it's important how our own personal trials can be a means whereby all of us reflect on our situation. We'll come back to that here in a moment. What does God say? For still the vision, the prophetic vision, what God's promising will happen. Still the vision awaits its appointed time. See, God's working this out in his appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. What is he referring to? Habakkuk wants to know, after God uses the Babylonians to chastise us, is he going to hold them accountable? Are they going to be brought to justice for their cruelty, for their wickedness? And God is telling him, oh yes, the evil that they are doing to others, I will recompense. I will hold them to account. But you see, Habakkuk, you need to wait. If it seems slow, wait for it. And just know it will come. Notice that? It will not lie. In other words, it might seem long in coming, like it's never going to happen. God said, it will surely come. Sometimes that's the reassurance we need. That God will surely, in time, bring about what his ultimate will is for us. And I like how he says then in verse 4, very important passage. This is quoted 3 times in the New Testament. Obviously, it's important. Behold, his soul is puffed up, the Babylonians, their ruler. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by faith. So I know he's wicked. I know he's arrogant. I know he thinks he's in control. But you've got to trust me. If you're going to be righteous, you need to trust me. So what is God essentially saying to him? Wait. Wait. That's the hard part for us. When you're in pain, when you're struggling, waiting. Sometimes that deliverance might be into the next life. But that's what we're called to do, to wait and then to trust. God says to the prophet, I need you to wait, and you need to trust me. The righteous will live by faith. Believe me when I say I will deal with it. And I love this too. This is, I think, where we fail so often. Keep the big picture in view, not just what you're going through at this point in your history, at the time that you've come along in God's dealing with Israel. Look, what does he say to him? Habakkuk 2:14. You see, a day is coming, he assures him, when the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That language is used more than once in the Hebrew Bible to talk about the coming age, when the glory of God would be known as, I think it's referring to the spread of the gospel. 2 Corinthians 4, I think my favorite passage in the Bible, verses 4 through 6. That glory of God is seen in the face of Jesus Christ, and it goes out to the world through the light of the gospel. So in other words, this is 700 years before Christ comes. And then think, we're 2,000 years beyond that. But he says, I'm working out my purpose to bring salvation to the whole world. One day a time is going to come when the whole world will be filled with my glory. And this may even have a final fulfillment, an ultimate fulfillment in the age to come when we think of the new heavens and the new earth, when God's glory will be fully manifested and enjoyed in its ultimate sense by God's people. But see, there's more than what's happening right now in our little moment in history. And there's more to what God is doing than my own comfort and my own crisis that I might be going through. Not to say that God doesn't care, but he's doing something bigger. And then he assures him in verse 20, this is a passage we know. He says, but the Lord, after he talks about the pagans and the folly of their idolatry, they think they know, they think they're ruling, they think they have power. But see, the Lord is the one, Yahweh, the God of Israel, our God. He is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. So in other words, accept that I'm the one in control. The Lord is the sovereign ruler of the nations. He is working, watch this. He is working out his purposes in his own time and in his own way. Not in the timing I wish for, or maybe not in the way that I would prefer if I could draw out the way I want my life to be or your life to be, or what maybe is on the horizon for us as God's people in this time in which we're living, or for God's people who are suffering tremendously right now in other parts of the world. Great calamity, great oppression, persecution. But God is working in all of that in His own time, in His own way. Now, how does Habakkuk respond to that? The Lord replies to him. How does he respond? And this is what I find so moving that I really want you to think about. Notice how his response is a prayer. It's a prayer. The prayer of Habakkuk, the prophet. Notice this, according to Shigai Onath. And that seems to be a reference to the choir leader or to someone who would take this and put it to instrumentation or put it in verse form for the rest of God's people to sing this. In other words, Habakkuk's own personal prayer, his response is intended to be for all of God's people. We say that frequently when we look at the Psalms and we see David or one of the psalmists struggling with something. And those personal trials were the expressions of faith in them and the anguish of spirit expressed by them. That was to give voice to all of God's people. That was to be something that all of them prayed together, that all of them could sing together, that forms the worship of the people of God. And so, what is it? He says, "O Lord, I've heard the report of you, and your work, O Lord, do I fear." He's thinking about what God had done in the past and how he had judged the Egyptians, how he brought judgment on the nations and on his own nation, the people of Israel. But notice, even though he fears knowing what God has done, he says, in the midst of the years, revive it. In the midst of the years, see the refrain like a song? In the midst of the years, make it known. Now I'm afraid, but Lord, here we are in time. Continue to do what it is your will to do. Continue to work as you know what needs to be accomplished for your purposes. Lord, bring it, we might say colloquially. And I want you to notice that last statement, though. If you're going to bring judgment on us, Lord, revive your work as you've done in the past. We know you're going to continue to work. You've chastised, you've brought punishment before. If you're going to bring that now, dear Lord, in that wrath, remember mercy. Remember mercy. I love that statement. I'm going to come back to it at the end. And that's something we should pray. If we need to be disciplined, if we need God to reprove us in some way, we can still accept that, but plead for mercy in it. What a powerful statement. In wrath, Lord, remember mercy. So now he's thinking about what's about to happen. Look at how expressive this is. Look at how dramatic it is. Here's what God's going to do, and my body trembles. Imagine it. My lips quiver at the sound. Imagine him visualizing the marching armies of Babylon in their cruelty, descending on Judah, descending on Jerusalem, descending on God's people, the invading army of the pagans. And he thinks about it, and he says his lips quiver at the sound. Rottenness enters my bones. My legs tremble beneath me. I hope it's not been the case, but maybe it has been for some of you. You receive news that is so traumatic, your knees buckle. If you haven't experienced that, I hope you haven't had to. But you can imagine it, where you get weak in the knees, where you fall to the ground, overwhelmed, shaking, quivering. That's what he's thinking about, what God's going to do in bringing chastisement upon his people. But now mark that next word. Look at that. Yet. I will quietly wait for the day of trouble to come upon the people who invade us. Now, depending on your translation, some translations have this as, I will quietly wait for the judgment to come on us, come on your people. In other words, I'm terrified of what's going to come, but I will accept it, Lord, that this is your doing. Or as the ESV is rendering it, and I think this is the better translation, it seems to me, but I'm not a Hebrew scholar. What he's saying is, I know one day you're going to judge them. You're going to hold them to account. He's taking comfort, righteous satisfaction, that God will set things right. God will hold them to account. And so I will wait. I will quietly wait for you to bring trouble on those people who are about to afflict us. So his plea for justice, his trust that God will be just. Now, here's the point of our lesson. Let's look at his joy and his strength, the prophet's joy and his strength. Now, here, these closing words of the book are what I was referring to earlier, this tremendous affirmation of faith. And it's so beautiful, it's so poetic. And so I have it in poetic verse as it's intended to be, I believe. And let me put it before you line by line. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Before we see where he's going with that, what's he saying? Even if they come upon us, and we're suffering through famine, the economy collapses, chaos reigns, the shelves are empty, we might say. No matter what happens on the horizon, what does he say? Here it is again. Here it is again. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Yes, even if all those things happen, even if the cancer comes back, even if I have to plan the funeral for my own child that I thought would bury me one day, even if the disaster falls upon me, I'm not going to let whatever happens to me take my joy, because the Lord is my joy. I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. It's God, Yahweh, the Lord, Adonai. He is my strength. You see how he's grounding himself in God. He will make my feet like the deer's. So in other words, even in the midst of the calamity, even struggling through the sorrow and the suffering and the wondering and the doubts, the agony, he's going to set me on that high mountain. I'm going to be able to stand like the deer on those rocky cliffs. He will make me tread on my high places. See, I know if my trust is in the Lord, my strength is in the Lord, I can make it through. Now, this is a part we might skip a lot of times. At the end of the verse, there's a space, and then you find this at the end. To the choir master with stringed instruments. But I want you to notice, just like at the beginning, where he gives instruction, apparently, to someone who would compose this. And then at the end, you see, he's telling him, look, this is a song for all of God's people. What I've just said, it's not just my own personal conviction. God wants it to be yours. He wants it to be mine. He wants us to pray this prayer. He wants us to sing this song as his people. And what do we learn from it? That our joy does not depend on what we have or what we do not have. It doesn't depend on our comfort or our circumstances, our wealth and prosperity. You hear me often expose the evil of the false health and wealth prosperity gospel, that God's will is for you always to have it easy and all your dreams come true, and for you never to be ill and always have abundance. No. That's not where our joy is. Our joy is in knowing God. It's trusting that He works in all things. Whatever we're going through individually, whatever you're going through collectively, He works in all things for the salvation of His people, for our ultimate good and for His glory. That's the big picture we were talking about. Thinking beyond this moment, thinking beyond my circumstances, thinking beyond my suffering, thinking beyond history to what's ahead. That's where our joy is, and our strength isn't in God taking away all the troubles that we may have to face. Our strength is in the Lord, knowing He will sustain us through all those trials. He will cause us, like the deer, to stand on the mountain. He will cause us to stand triumphantly in the end. That's where your strength is. Not in your circumstances, not in being delivered from all affliction, but in knowing the Lord, trusting the Lord, in the presence of the Lord in your life. Now, you know the whole Bible is about Jesus Christ. In Revelation 19:10, we're told the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of the prophets. What the prophets were ultimately pointing to, the glory of the Lord will fill the earth. What they were ultimately pointing to, of course, is Christ. But I want you to remember what He said earlier. In wrath, remember mercy. When I see those two words together like that, I can't help but think of the cross, because the cross is where Christ bore the wrath of God, Romans 5:8 and 9. We're saved through Him from the wrath of God. I deserve to be punished for my sin, but Christ bears the wrath of God that I might receive the mercy of God, so that, as Paul says, Romans 3:23 through 26, God can be just. What did Habakkuk say? Lord, I know You're the everlasting one, the Holy One. You're of purer eyes than to behold evil. Evil can't dwell in Your presence. But see, God resolved that accepting me, a sinful person, into His presence through the cross of Christ, in the suffering of His own Son. In wrath, He gave us mercy. And so this points to the cross and our response. Habakkuk points to our response as well. What did God tell him in Habakkuk 2 and verse 4? The righteous shall live by faith. As I said, quoted 3 times in the New Testament. Paul quotes it when he says, Romans 1:16 and 17, the gospel is God's power to salvation to everyone who believes. To the Jew first and also to the Greek. For therein, in the gospel, is revealed the righteousness of God. How God can be righteous and forgive sinners. He says, as it is written, and he quotes this, the righteous shall live by faith. And so, we're saved by faith. Paul quotes it in Galatians 3. It's quoted again in Hebrews 11 about enduring suffering. And so the idea is, this is how we receive salvation, by faith, by trusting the Lord, a faith that submits to Him, that moves us to comply with the conditions of salvation, but then to live by that faith. It's not just the initial faith when you come to believe and come to receive salvation, but you live by that faith. It's the operating principle of everything in the Christian life. In the wrath that God poured out on Jesus on the cross, He has given us mercy. You receive that by faith. And the Lord has shown us how and when our faith brings salvation to us when we surrender to His will in the gospel. If we can help you to do that, if you're having a crisis of faith, dear brother or sister, if we can help you through that, whatever it is, let us know. Let's stand and sing this song together.